Can you all figure out what my background screen is this time?
That's the old walled city, isn't it?
That's the sketch of Fort Moultrie.
Oh, okay.
Figured we had Carolina Day the other day and needed to honor, Fort Moultrie, and
Okay, I just saw the wall there.
yeah, it's kind of hard to make it all out.
Yeah.
The little ships over there, you can see them.
Nice.
Just so everyone knows, we are live on YouTube right now.
Thank you, ma'am.
And Mike, you're practicing in front of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, that's what I got today. Go right to the highest court in the land.
There you go.
They've been pretty busy of late, haven't they?
I got a lot going on.
They have.
I'll be back in a minute.
So do we have everybody we need? I see Susan. I don't see Susan.
We are waiting on Jason and Dan Riccio, and they did respond that they would be available to attend today. Actually, Dan is signing on now, and I believe Chief Reynolds.
Yep, and I don't see our lawyer is not on yet.
Chief Reynolds is trying to sign on now, but he's having some technical difficulties, but he is working on it.
Okay. This is Chief. I think we're just waiting for Jason and Susan, right? Madam Clerk?
That's correct.
Okay.
And Susan is signing on now.
And I see Jason with us. You mean Councilmember Saccharin?
Jason Kronsberg.
Oh, Jason Kronsberg, okay. Well, I think he's a little later in the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum and the chiefs are on the line. Did you want to begin?
Yeah, so Susan And I guess the other folks who we're waiting for are, they can come in a little bit later. I think they're the ones we're waiting for come on the agenda a little bit later. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll call the July 1st, 2020 meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. It is a little bit after 4:30 p.m. Mr. Mayor, I don't think we ever call on you to lead us in prayer. So would you mind either leading us in a moment of silence or a prayer?
Yeah, I will lead us in a prayer. Almighty Father, please be with us today as we deliberate and review the events of Saturday, May 30th. And we ask for the blessings, Lord, on those who were impacted that night, both citizens and our brave first responders, our police and fire departments that were impacted that night. And we pray for good actions coming forth from the review of that night, and for a better response going forward. In your name we pray, amen.
Thank you, sir. Amen. All right. We have a very ambitious agenda on our plate this afternoon. I appreciate everybody filling in on a couple of days before the 4th of July holiday. Thank you all for being available and having this done. At our June 11th meeting of the Public Safety Committee, we had a overview on the status regarding public safety and a discussion of the events of May 30th. We discussed at that point that we would have a follow-up and that we would keep council apprised of any new developments concerning the events or any review of documents or requests for documents that may be coming down the pike. So I understand that Susan Dina received a FOIA request from, I think, a TV station in response to that. And part of our overall review of the events of May 30th, because I think we were talking about other events that were occurring associated with that, including the number of arrests, referrals maybe to the federal government for prosecution, preparation for anticipated civil lawsuits that may come out of that. So this has been an ongoing work in progress, I think, as to the police department's internal review as to those events of May 30th. And so I understand that there was a review of some recordings, and so I'm going to look to my lawyer, Susan Medina, and tee you up on that a little bit. Then maybe you can introduce Mallory and what has transpired since our last meeting on June the 11th.
Sure, council member. Just to backtrack a little bit, we received we didn't, the county received a FOIA request on June 2nd from the media asking for radio transmissions that occurred the night of May 30th and going into May 31st. That response is due technically on Friday, but the tapes have been sent to the city for us to review first before they're released. City received the tapes and the FOIA request on June 9th. As you'll hear from Heather, who is our attorney with the police department, it's very lengthy, very detailed. And so prior to releasing them, and we're prepared to release them, or the county is prepared to release them today, we wanted to give this committee a heads up as to those radio transmissions and make sure that you were aware of them before they were released. In conjunction with that, Heather is ready to sort of walk through with you what the radio transmissions say and how they fit into the broader picture of the police department's response for these particular events. She also put together a very short memo that summarizes the tapes, because as I said, they're very lengthy, very detailed. And I just sent that to Council Member Shahid and requested that he go ahead and send that on to the council members and to the mayor, so they have that in front of them to review as she goes through the timeline. And council member, I don't know if you've had a chance to do that yet. If not, I can go ahead.
I just sent it to the mayor and members of my committee. It just went out, and I'm putting out my copy now. So
Okay, great. So we thought it might be helpful as Heather goes through with you what is on the radio transmissions, sort of help decipher that in a way, to go through the facts that are there. And as I said, they're long and detailed. And so we felt that it might be helpful to just have a summary of those facts. And again, the county is planning on releasing those radio transmissions today, it's my understanding, in response to that June 2nd FOIA request from the media. As is the usual case, as a courtesy, they will send them to the city before they're released, so that the city has an opportunity to review the documents, to see, if there are any issues before they're released. And we appreciate that courtesy here. And so with that being said, Heather has reviewed them. She'll give you a timeline, and then these will be released. The radio transmissions will be released a little bit later. And you are welcome to have the transmissions yourself. We can burn them on a disc if you'd like and make them available for you. And I'm not quite certain, probably the county may have them on a link somewhere, I'm not positive. But the long story short is we are happy to provide you with the information that Heather will be talking about. So.
all right, thank you for that. And also for the members of the committee, when we get these, when the city gets a FOIA request, we have an opportunity to review those recordings, because there may be something sensitive on particularly with police recordings that may entail something along the lines of an ongoing police investigation or police tactics that are not subject to review. And so we have an opportunity always to review these FOIA requests in advance. And this is nothing unusual in what we would have done in normal circumstances. Is that correct, Susan? Make sure I'm not overstating anything. What our normal procedure would be.
Again, this was originally submitted to the 911 center, who is the depository for these radio transmissions. And then again, our usual protocol as a courtesy is they will send them, they'll burn a copy of them, send it over to the CPD. CPD will then have an opportunity to review them before they are released in response to the FOIA by the county. And so that's the process that we went through here.
Okay, good deal. Thank you. So Heather, are you available now to give us sort of a summary of this 4-page memorandum?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name
Mr.
is
Chairman,
Heather.
can I ask a question before we get going here?
Yes, sir.
Sorry. I'm just trying to figure out sort of what the role is going to be of this committee going forward, and are we going to have sort of an ongoing oversight of any investigation and requests, or are we going to get reports? What is our long-term play here?
So, good question, Councilmember Seekings. And I sort of started us off on our meeting of June 11th, that we wanted an update of what happened on May 30th. And between the chief and his staff and our legal department, they advised us that they were going to start this process of reviewing documents and stuff. So this is just sort of another stage in that. How we go forward, we will continue, I think, to monitor, particularly as questions come up, if on as needed basis. And we sort of can call meetings and chat with the chief about what else is transpiring with his oversight of the events of May 30th. That's a very reasonable part of, I think, our responsibility as public safety committee members.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So with that being said, Heather, you're back on.
Thank you very much. Again, my name's Heather Malloy. I'm an assistant corporation counsel here with the city. The last time we met, I told you that I would be developing a timeline. However, I said that would take a great deal of time to do. There is still a lot of information coming in many different forms regarding the incidents that occurred on May 30th and May 31st, 2020. In particular for today, Susan did ask me to do a FOIA review of the incident channel 3 audio from Consolidated Dispatch. And so I've done that, and I have a little bit of an update for you, and I have put together a pretty general timeline. I can tell you that the audio and the link is about 6.5 hours long. It's a lot to listen to. And keep in mind that that 6.5 hours of tape covers about 13 hours of real time. So when you do get it and listen to it, just keep that in mind that the airspace between calls has been limited. Thus, we only have 6.5 hours. The other thing I want to note when you're listening to it, you're not going to see the actual hours of the tape. It'll just say, it'll go from 0 to 6.5. So it's kind of hard to tell what actual time of day it is, but I really did my best to try and do that. So when I talk about my timeline, those are approximate times, okay? Additionally, as far as the FOIA itself, I didn't find anything that needed to be redacted, but I had to listen to, obviously every single part of it, keeping that in mind to see whether or not anything needed to be redacted, all right? The other thing I want to mention is after going through all of those 6.5 hours methodically, I did not hear at any time a stand down order given. So that's one of the things I want to note. I also want to kind of put in context what this Consolidated Dispatch audio is. It is created as a result of an incident command situation. So we had a protest that was occurring on May 30th. So the police department put together an incident command plan. And as part of that plan, they open a separate channel called Incident Channel 3. So that any calls that regularly would come in and like patrol calls within the peninsula, those are on a separate channel. So that's not what we're looking at. That would be another tape, another recording. Do you see what I mean? So keep that in mind also. The purpose of Incident Channel 3 is really to cover the operations of the command situation that's occurring. Now, at that time, we opened the PSOC, which is the Public Safety Operations Center. It's located at headquarters, and that's where you have all your command staff throughout the whole incident. And when you hear the communications going back and forth, you're hearing generally the command staff speaking. You're also hearing officers on the ground speaking. And because it's an incident command channel, we have many different agencies that are able to listen to it too, because we want to have the support from all other agencies available. So you will hear calls from different agencies come in as well. Sometimes you will hear dispatch calls come to this incident channel, even though that's not really the purpose of it. And many times they are just calling in just to advise this is going on, because we know the other channel is getting those calls, and actually the command staff that is in the PSOC, they're holding a radio for Incident Channel 1 for the regular calls, and then they've got this one. there's a lot of coordination going on back and forth. There are also cell phone calls going on, et cetera. So I'm kind of framing this for you so you know that what you're going to hear doesn't include everything, because that was my question in listening to it, okay? You're also not going to hear a lot of the planning and decision-making that's made in the command, like what's supposed to happen next. You may not hear all of that. That is being communicated within the command, some of those decisions. So keep that in mind as well. At the same time, you'll hear there are fire calls. So the police are responding to one patrol calls, okay, that are occurring, but they're also responding to your incident command calls. And in addition to that, they are getting fire requests to assist fire with all the fire calls coming in. So there are a lot of different things in the works. Additionally, there are a lot of calls behind the scene to call in for additional resources throughout the area. That is going on as well. Sometimes you will hear that. Sometimes you'll hear one of the agencies call in and say, we're on our way. So that's how I kind of pieced some of that together. But you might not hear all the actual calls, hey, we need you to assist, all right? Additionally, there's some coordination going on for the reverse 911 call that came out at some point. There's a lot of decisions making about adjusting schedules of officers within CPD to bring in additional resources as needed, and many other activities. So if we simply look at incident channel 3, that's where we're at. Now, I've also, in my memo to Susan, I've added some other information just for update purposes, that a combined total of 238 officers were in service to respond to the protests and riots on May 30th and going into the morning of the 31st. It was a collaboration between several jurisdictions to include CPD, Charleston County, Mount Pleasant, Berkeley County, North Charleston, Goose Creek, Somerville, SLED, DNR, and probation and parole. So we had a lot of agencies in combination working together to get the rioters out of the city. We also know that we had Air One, which is Charleston County helicopter, who was over there that really did a wonderful job in assisting with the coordination and also helping us identify where the rioters were as they were going across the peninsula. So very helpful coordination between all the entities in the area. In all, 10 arrests were made that evening. Since that time, however, a total of 74 arrest warrants have been issued, 27 offenders have been identified, and 65 warrants have been served. The total number of offenders who have been arrested to date is 23. And here are the crimes committed, range anywhere from arson, burglary, inciting a riot, assault and battery on citizens and police officers, and of course, damage to property, which is very evident. So what I did was I divided kind of the timeline into two sections because we had a protest and we had a riot. So initially I will go through the protest timeline and then I will go through the riot timeline. I'm going to give you it kind of in a nutshell version. If you sit and listen to 6.5 hours of this, which I really encourage you to do so, because it will really give you an idea of, in this part, remember, we're not listening to everything, but at least in this part, as to kind of how things happened. And then you will see that you'll be able to identify the time in which a riot started on the peninsula. But you will also be able to understand all the things that were set in motion and all the things were going on. There were very, very many things going on, and coordination, collaboration to get to the endpoint. So
Heather,
from about,
I'm gonna interrupt you at this
Sure.
point, and let me just ask the other members of the committee where we are right now. Do y'all have any questions for Heather at this particular point?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Did you send us something that has this timeline? Is there a memo or something that goes along with this?
Yes, Councilmember Seekins, I just sent it to you. I just got it, and I just sent it to you 2 seconds
Thank you.
ago. So all to the mayor and to all members of this committee, y'all should have that. So it
Okay, I
is.
don't have it yet, but I'll keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, keep an eye out on for it. Councilmember Shealy, have you checked your email? And Councilmember Saccharin?
It just popped in.
Okay, okay. And Mayor, I sent it to you as well. So it is about
Thanks, I
4
got it.
pages, 4 pages long. And it is, as she's about to describe, it's broken down into chunks of timelines, like 2 to 4 o'clock, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, etc. So before she went into that, I want to make sure y'all had any questions about what she's went over so far. Okay, all right. Go ahead then, Heather.
sure, okay, so the PSOC at headquarters was opened at about 2 o'clock, and so that's when the recording starts. So from 2 to 4, that's a 2-hour period. We had the protests that began at Marion Square. The protest, and at that time, of course, you had your command and your PSOC, but you had officers that were part of the incident plan who were located on Marion Square, and their job was to monitor the crowd. The crowd during this 2 to 4 hour period began to increase in size, and it got quite large. The crowd at one point wanted to leave Marion Square and kind of march around Marion Square and march down south and then come back up north to Marion Square. So that was a time when police really had to bring in traffic management, diverting traffic, closing intersections, sometimes stopping the crowd at intersections so that they could do it and letting them go. So you're going to hear a lot of that kind of communication on the audio. Who's doing what? Which intersection are we closing? We need someone down here, etc. You will hear quite a bit of that for that whole 2 hours. So in addition to our officers that were at Marion Square, we also had some civil disturbance units staged at the Gilliard, and that was our CPD, CDU, and also Mount Pleasant was there as well in case we needed support for the event. So I did during that time period. There were times when we had to, like I said, open up certain intersections and continue to let the crowd march. And that was the plan at that time. Continue to let the crowd march as long as they're peaceful. So as they're marching, you will hear officers communicate back and forth. There are some officers at the front of the crowd, some are in the back. They're kind of walking along with the crowd, and there are some on the sides of the crowd as well. So there's a lot of kind of coordination and management going on during that time period. Between the hour of 4 and 5, we're still continuing with a peaceful protest and the traffic containment. Throughout the 2 to 4 and 4 to 5 period, you may hear where there's a disturbance or some activity happening. It's generally short-lived, and then the protest continues. At 4 to 5, there is a notation of vandalism at White Point Gardens, and then there is some type of disturbance at King and Calhoun. At that point, PSOC Command sends in CPD from the CDU and Mount Pleasant to assist in that activity, and then the crowd goes back to calm. Now we go into the 5 to 6 p.m. time period. Again, protesters are continue marching. Our crowd containment continues. Our traffic management continues. At meeting in Calhoun, there are some protesters that are challenging the Mount Pleasant CDU there, but they are nonviolent. The PSOC command then instructs the Mount Pleasant to disengage if necessary, if they need to avoid any escalation of the situation. We do hear that there's glass broken on one of Mount Pleasant's vehicles, and there's some graffiti noted at some of businesses. I think I repeated that a couple times in the memo, I'm sorry. And PSOC command advises that there's rain coming and that will disperse the crowd. So the thinking at that point with the crowd, because it's very large, is okay, we're hearing the rain. You'll hear that mentioned a couple of times. The rain's coming, the weather's coming, etc. The thinking being that let's wait for the storm to come in, because if we get a big storm and we get, some good showers, that will disperse this large crowd greatly. So lo and behold, at 5:30 approximately, rainstorm does come in, and the majority of this crowd at that point disperses. And is decided to hold their day shift over at that point. So now we're at the 6 to 7 p.m. So we have much smaller crowd, and I don't have exact numbers. I mean, sometimes you can hear on the audio some numbers being thrown out, but I don't have exact numbers on that. So we have what can be called a much smaller crowd now that is present. And that crowd starts to head to the Ravenel Bridge. At that point, PSOC, when they are notified of that action, decides to send. Now we have Charleston County there. Okay, so we now have an additional CDU team for us at our disposal to help with this. We decide to send Charleston County, Mount Pleasant, and CPD CDU teams down to the bridge so that we can shut down the interstate and protect the protesters and vehicles that may be stuck in traffic because of the situation. And the protesters at that point, they begin going up some of the exit ramps, and some are jumping the median. So there's a lot of coordination there. Again, you've got your CDU units going, and you also have a lot of traffic management and trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? Where are the protesters going? What are we going to shut off? So there's a lot, you'll hear throughout that whole hour, a lot of coordination talk in that aspect. So from the 7 to 8 p.m. time frame, so the beginning of the 7 p.m. time frame, we're still at the Ravenel Bridge, and we're still dealing with all of the traffic and the protesters. The PSOC command advises to make arrests if needed to the units on the ground. The protesters begin leaving the bridge area to march back to the peninsula. So at some point, they decide we're going to come off and we're going to just continue to march down the peninsula. Now, when they're marching down the peninsula, you will hear there are officers on the ground, as in the beginning, much smaller group now, but walking along with the crowd as they go along. As they're marching down onto the peninsula, it's hard to tell exactly where everyone is, but there's a lot of kind of meandering through some of the streets and roadways. There's a report that there's a fire in the grass. In particular, I note that that was checked on and that there was not a fire. We get notification that our Charleston County helicopter has been staged in case we need the helicopter. And so now you're kind of having separate groups of protesters going through the city and meandering through some roadways. And we're following, and you'll hear the communication. They're here, there, etc. So we are monitoring. They are marching at this point. In essence, the majority of the protesters end up at the market. And again, CPD officers are with them and monitoring. So that's essentially the end of the timeline for the actual protest. And so now I'm going to go into the riot section. So between the 8 and 9 p.m. hour is when the riot occurs. Now, I did my best with the times. These may not be exact, so please keep that in mind. I think that the riot activity I'm about to discuss occurred around maybe the 8:15 mark, but without a lot of further information, I can't pin that down yet. All right. So the riot is beginning. We're at about 8:15. We have rioters in the market. They are flipping tables, smashing windows, fighting and assaulting citizens, throwing objects at the officers. And at this point, when this activity begins, the PSOC command is instructing CD units to get to the market. Remember, we had CDU units over at the Ravenel Bridge, 3 units. They're making calls. You'll hear them get over here to the market. And they are the officers on the ground are instructed to make arrests, but wait till your CDU unit's coming. They're right around the block, so that it's safe to do so. Then this is when you start to hear, remember when I told you in the beginning, you may hear some dispatch calls coming over, even though they are on a different channel. That's when you'll start hearing some of those calls come through. So I noted that as well. So during this time period, the fighting is continuing at the market. We have Charleston County and CPD units. They have arrived from the bridge, attempting to contain the rioters. You'll hear it. It's a lot. You'll hear that the rioters are coming up behind the officers and attacking them. Then you have the rioters that are between 2 CDU unit lines. And then you also have them running behind the officers, flanking them and attacking them at the same time. So there's a lot of activity going on there, and people trying to get there to assist to contain the rioters. At some point, the rioters begin moving towards Meeting Street. The attacks are continuing. CPD command is continuing to authorize arrests and deployment of less lethal. The plan is for CPD command the CPD command's plan at that time is to continue to push rioters towards East Bay and to stay away from King Street at that point. They want to push the rioters north and out of the peninsula. So you'll hear a lot of activity going on, but you'll hear a lot of the rioters just going. It's not like they're sitting there in front of you. They're running, going this way, that way. And it's really, you can hear it's an effort to contain and make a plan. So then we get into the 9 to 10 p.m. hour. The riot is continuing. Now the rioters are up on King Street at Charleston Place. Again, continued fighting and destruction, continued advisement to deploy less lethal munitions. Now we have our Charleston County helicopter arriving to assist. And we need the Charleston County helicopter to assist in dispersal notifications to the crowd to disperse, and also to assist the PSOC command in tracking the movement of the rioters. at the PSOC command, there are cameras, there's city cameras that the PSOC command can look at, but they don't cover everything. So there are a lot of times when the command is getting information from officers on the ground as to where, riders are located, where their officers are located, et cetera. So it's an additional communication piece, an additional aid to go through with the plan. At some point, you can, again, you're hearing those dispatch calls that some that are coming over for advisement. Just this is occurring. We also have QRV units that are patrolling King Street. So I'm talking about what the units assigned to this incident are doing. But remember, again, there's a separate component going on aside from that with any calls that are coming in for patrol assistance. So that's happening, and patrol are assisting on those calls. That would be on the other channel I'm talking about. But in addition to that, we have QRV units that are going up to assist on some of the King Street calls. We now have riders are near King Street. Our CD units are at King and Calhoun and meeting at Calhoun. And the idea at that point is, let's get our CDU units in a line at each of these intersections so that we can start getting containment and control of the situation. And the idea, again, is to disperse the riders and push them north out of the peninsula. At some point, we have deployment of gas and less lethal. These units are trying to move forward, but they're having a very difficult time doing that. There are reports of riders chasing officers and throwing bottles at officers. You can hear all that going on in some of the calls that are coming in. The CDU lines that I talked about at those two intersections, they then begin to move north in an effort to start the operational efforts. But here's the issue. Marion Square is in the middle. Marion Square is dark. You can hear requests for Air One to light up the park. Can you shine a light down there? We need to see what's going on there, because you have riders that are hiding in the park and waiting for the police to come up and move forward. And so we were trying to get past that park area so that we could continue. At that time, when we were trying to move north, the riders came out of the dark in Marion Square and began to attack the CDU officers. The Air One, they have a spotlight, but they're not able to light up the entire park. So we did get, the riders are coming out as the units are moving forward, and they are attacking them, and they are flanking, coming behind them, etc. At that point, the units had to move back to those intersections and retreat and hold that ground until further support that had been called comes in. They were waiting for additional units to come in so that there was protection around Marion Square so that they could move forward sufficiently. The idea then was to hold that area and hold that territory to prevent people from going down King Street and contain as much as possible. So now we're at the 10 to 11 p.m. period. The riot is continuing. Now we're starting to get in more resources from other jurisdictions. The units at the Calhoun intersections continue to disperse with less lethal, and they begin again to move up King Street. Now there's some more reinforcement. The QRV units are continuing to go up to King Street. You hear SLED is going to assist in some of those calls up on King Street. And I hear that there's patrol assisting with some of the calls. You're going to hear some of those calls as well, but you're not going to hear a lot of the response that you would hear on the other channel. So at some point, oh, and there are also fire calls coming in. And so, you know, requests for the units to assist fire in going out on the calls that they have for their protection as well. So a lot of moving parts going on. At some point you hear an officer on King Street who has been a patrol officer who has been assisting on a call up on King Street. You hear him yelling for assistance, calling out. He's being chased by a mob up King Street. And I think he is caught by the mob, but he is able to get free. And then eventually sufficient support does arrive to assist those lines going up, and they are successful in moving past Marion Square, which was their main goal. So now they had to come back once, but now they have the support and they're getting up past Marion Square. Now we go into the 11 o'clock to midnight time frame. Again, the rioting is continuing. More and more resources are coming in to support, which is helping. You still have groups coming around to attack. I mean, you'll hear it. You'll hear an officer in a different area. A group of 100 people just appeared. They're coming up King Street behind the CDU units, and just continually trying to deal with the situation that keeps popping up in different places, track them, reassess, come up with another plan. And then you'll hear, I think, in my opinion, a really amazing coordination between all the different jurisdictions coming together and handling things as they just popped up. So you'll hear a lot of that going on. Continued advisement of less lethal, and then the calls for fire are continuing, and then the CD units continue to push north to disperse the rioters out of the peninsula. When we get to the 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. timeframe, again, they're methodically working together, all the jurisdictions to move past each side street. So you'll hear them say, they'll move up a little bit and they will stop these lines that I'm talking about. And they will all together stop. They will make sure there is not one person left. And, you know, a rider here or there, they'll stop, make sure that's clear, and then they'll move again. It's a very methodical process that you will hear over the time period. The calls, you'll continue to hear some of the dispatch calls from the other channel. And again, fire calls are coming in. At this time, you're going to hear that arrests are being made. And then finally, you get to the 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. timeframe. That's when all the units, again, all of the resources together are moving to push forward and push all the riders out of the peninsula. A lot of the calls are dying down. There are more calls, and I'd say even maybe in the 12 a.m. period, are a lot. You still have some calls for property destruction. You have calls, a lot more fire calls is what I heard during the later hours. And then at that point, there are further arrests that are being made. So I can tell you that it's 6.5 hours is a long time. And what I gave you is really a nutshell. There's just tremendous, there's a lot more detail. I mean, you can just imagine all the information that comes out in that time period. So, I would suggest everybody listen to it as well. and just to see kind of the how it proceeded, and also how the plan was put together, and everybody came together to get the rioters out of the city. But if you have any questions for me, let me know.
Head, I just want to clarify a couple of things. First, thank you for spending all that time listening to 6.5 hours of police conversation and calls coming in from citizens and other folks. Appreciate you doing that. It's a hard job. I've had to do that to some extent, but not 6.5 hours. So I know that was very tedious, but very important for you to do that for us. The second part is that what you're reporting to us is what you have heard. You did make a comment about, in your opinion, the collaboration was wonderful towards the end of your report, but the information on here is not your opinion. It really is what you are just summarizing and what you heard on the tapes. Is that right?
Right. No. And I don't mean to put my opinion in here
Yeah, I just wanted.
whatsoever. I mean, no, my job is to first, review the tape for FOIA purposes.
Right.
And also my job is to kind of give you a framework of how things work so you can understand the audio when you're listening to it. I hope I set that up sufficiently for you. If you have any questions about that, let me know. But no, my job is to review the tape, give you some summary of some of the things, just so you have an idea of what was occurring. But no, it has nothing to do with me, frankly. That's,
Right.
And also I do, though, at the same time, encourage you to listen to it as
Right.
well. I mean, the tape is the tape. What is being said is what is being said. I'm just attempting to summarize it in the best nutshell that I can.
And finally, I just want to clarify one other point, because I think you said this. A combined total of 238 officers were pressed into service, but it was not always 238 officers pressed into service. We started off with a smaller group, and more resources came in over the course of the night. I think you said that several times, but I don't want people to get the impression that the strength of the law enforcement folks out there was always at 238. It got to that point over time, and that was the final cumulative number of officers being 238. That happened more towards the end of the evening as opposed to the beginning part of the evening. And
yeah, so when I put that on the report that you see, that's kind of just an information total for the time period. I'm not really breaking it down, and I don't have those numbers. I have these numbers, just where you can see the total number of resources that were used throughout that period.
that's good. Okay, so I'm going to open up to members of my committee and see if they have any particular questions, or the mayor have any particular questions. Seeing none, that's the mayor. Yes, sir. You're muted.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Heather, for that diligent review. I want to thank this committee for taking on the task and our department of a thorough review and analysis of what happened on the night of May 30th, and for us collectively to let our citizens know we will answer any and all questions. We will be totally transparent. The tapes are what they are. Everyone can listen to them. And as we continue to get additional information, as you suggested, Mr. Chairman, we continue to bring that information to this committee and to council, and hence to the public for a complete review. I must say, sitting here listening, Heather, to your recap of the events of that night, I share with this committee and all of our citizens that the night of May 30th is for Charleston a collective worst nightmare. I mean, I think now about May 30th as I would a Category 5 hurricane. It's the worst a nightmare for our city for this to have occurred. Having said that, I'm thankful, so thankful to our police and fire responders and their actions on their night. That night, they were attacked, but our citizens were attacked as well. The resources were such as you described as we called and waited for additional backup to occur, that they were battling for the street. They were battling for control of the street that night. And as we know, further up the street, they weren't able to respond as they normally would to a 911 call, and multiple 911 calls that were coming in, hundreds of them around the city. So as we continue this review and analysis of anatomy of a riot, if you will, we continue to learn lessons. We've learned lessons already for not just a better outcome, but a commitment from everyone involved with the city of Charleston, our citizens included, that this will not happen again. And I just want to thank you again for your diligent review and this committee as we continue to learn and do better going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Sackett, I saw your hand up as well.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mayor. I just want to say, thanks to both chiefs, and thank you, Heather, for putting that together. One of the things that struck me was potentially for someone in the public, this is all contextual, so we're reading it and hearing it. It'd be great if we could get some sort of visual, because one of the things that I took away from this was, the flanking and the separation of our folks. I didn't realize how much activity was happening at Market and down on Market Street. So I think from a visual perspective, it's going to be nice once we explain this to the public to see that, in many ways our forces were split up and had to maintain and come back over to Marion Square. So I guess what I'm saying is it would be nice to see a visual representation of this in addition to a narrative that we do have. Thank you.
And thank you for that comment, Councilmember Sackett. And I don't know what is available from a visual standpoint as far as recordings are concerned.
I'm sorry, Chair. I'm not talking about a video. I'm just talking about maybe a diagram that, at 5:45, folks were here, and then protesters moved down King Street, and then at 6:30 they were here. So it could be more of a graphic of sorts. It doesn't have to be video.
Okay. Yeah, I had the same a little bit better. Thank you.
Yeah.
And maybe we can do that. Maybe we can put a graphic together with the timeline showing on that. That would be helpful as well. Councilmember Shealy, any thoughts or questions at this time?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Heather for putting this together, putting all that time into this. Appreciate all of your work, and I will be listening to it and trying to make out what I can as a civilian type person. But just thank you for your work in putting this together and getting it to us.
Heather, and we had talked about this earlier, and I didn't see it in your report, and because I don't think it is really part of what you hear on the audio, but it would be helpful as we talked about the number of officers who are present throughout the day. There was also a fluctuation, and you mentioned that at some point when the rain came, the crowds got smaller. But there was certainly a large number of peaceful protesters beginning early on around 2 o'clock and 3 and 4 o'clock. And that number may have been around, I think I've heard the number 2,000-ish, a number of protesters. Then we have estimates of the number of folks at the bridge and then the number of folks at the market. And we've categorized those as riders. They went from a protester to a rider. And then when the lines were being set up on Calhoun and King and Calhoun and Meeting, we have an estimate also of the number of protesters. And I think that number was in the 200 or 250 kind of range. And I know those are estimates, but at certain points, the police were greatly outnumbered, almost 2 to 1, with the number of officers on the scene versus the number of rioters in the later hours of the evening. And so that kind of follow-up maybe go along with Councilmember Sacred's suggestion with a visual could help us understanding the situation better as well. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and so as far as the numbers are concerned, throughout the audio, you can hear different numbers because, well, in the beginning, we do hear the number 2,000 as far as the protest growing into that size. And, you know, you'll hear numbers coming out, and I think a lot of them are approximations. I don't think they're any exact numbers. But then after the rain, remember I said the rain came in about 5:30, there's a reduction. And you're going to hear a couple different numbers because you're having some officers estimate that are on the ground about the number. So I'd have to look back and see what that number is, but it may be around the 200 range. So going from 2,000 to maybe 200 or so. But then when you have the riders that are coming through the city after the bridge, that's kind of when you're picking up other people that are coming through the city, that are coming together. Remember I said there's about 3 groups that end up coming together at the market right before the market occurs. So I'd have to look back to see what those numbers are.
Yeah, and I think that that's something we can put together that would help as you're doing the visual part of that as well.
Okay.
Susan, is there anything else that we needed to cover from Heather's wonderful and very detailed report?
I don't think so. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Anything else, council members, asked you, item number 2 on our agenda?
So just a quick question about when will we have access to the actual audio?
Can someone, Susan, can you respond to that?
It should be available right after this meeting. Well, let me double check with CPD and see how quickly we can get it to you. It's my understanding that the county also will be releasing it immediately. So let me verify that and I'll get back to you hopefully before this meeting ends.
Okay, thank you.
And that's something we can access digitally, right, Susan?
I believe so, but let me confirm that and I'll get back to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. Thanks for everybody who had a hand in working with Heather on this. I know there was a lot of hours spent on this. It took more than 6.5 hours just to listen. I'm sure those things are very tedious. So a very good report. Thank you so much, everybody involved, Susan and Heather and Chief and your staff as well. Chief Curria, can you give us an update on the vandalism that we heard about last week at the Charleston Memorial Park?
Certainly. So good afternoon, everybody. Just a quick overview of what did happen. Early Friday morning, I believe it was a Charleston police officer either came upon the damage or was made aware of the damage at the memorial. So he notified Charleston fire personnel who immediately responded to assess and to fix the damage. So we had people working on it at about 2 or 2:30 in the morning, from what I understand. The damage is contained to the 9 PVC crosses that are at Savannah Highway. Those were pulled out of the ground. Some of them were thrown into the roadway, along with the smaller American flags that affixed to those PVC crosses. Then the person or persons who did this also took down the 2 larger flags that are inside the park. So the American flag, I believe, was thrown into the street. The Charleston 9 flag was evidently, somebody tried to set that on fire. Excuse me. They were largely unsuccessful, but I think the flag did get some burns in it. So later that morning, through efforts from the firefighters and those that work in the shop in the fire department, all the damage was repaired, and I believe that the damage estimate was just shy of $500. So we were able to take care of things pretty quickly. We had a couple of artifacts knocked over inside the park itself. We were able to right those. So by mid-morning, I think if you had not known that there was damage to the Memorial Park, you would not be able to walk up to the Memorial Park and discern that anything had happened. As far as warrants and whatnot, I'm sure that is more in Chief Reynolds' ballpark, so I'll turn it over to him for just a second. But before I do, what I would like to say is I want to publicly thank the Charleston Police Department for how professional they have been. Not that I would expect anything different, but their professionalism and how quickly they acted upon this is very impressive. And it's important to the firefighters. It's important to the police officers. So the support that we got was great. I also want to make sure that everybody knows that later on Friday, for the numbers that I have for the family members in the Charleston 9 group, they did get a personal call from me to just make them aware that the memorial had been damaged, gave them an overview of the damage and the actions that had been taken thus far. So I'll turn it over to Chief Reynolds for the police side of things.
So I would just echo Dan's sense that we work closely together on this, as I hope we do on everything that we do together. From the very beginning early in the morning, and our detectives went out from Team 4 in working with Mike Jalazla and the fire marshals and others in the fire department and working together. Got video, did interviews, had a tip from a citizen who had stopped, and through a collection of the investigation, identified an individual who's responsible for this and got warrants to include something that happened a couple hours on that same day, same time period, where they had taken this individual had taken a flag at another location. We have not served the warrants yet. We know where this person is located, and they will be served in the next few days. And we're working closely together with Dan and his team, making sure that they're communicating and are aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Thank you, sir. Members of the committee, any questions for either Chief Reynolds or Chief Currier as to this item? Yes, sir, Mr. Shealy.
Thank you, Councilman Shade. Chief, you obviously don't have this person in custody, but do we have any idea of the motive for doing this?
Try to characterize this properly. It's not associated with this movement. I think there's a lot of people that are concerned that this is something to do with the civil unrest that we've had recently, targeting statues, monuments, the protests, the rioters. I can say with authority that it's not associated with any of that. This person, it really doesn't make much sense why anybody would do something like this. And this particular person, we will talk to, and but I can say that it's isolated, and this person who did this, we'll have to find out. I can't say what she was thinking. It was a female, and why she would do it. But we believe that it's isolated and not associated with any of those other threats and events, which initially, because of so many things that have been going on in our communities, it was just the anniversary where we just celebrated the lives of those 9 heroes. It couldn't have been worse timing. It couldn't have struck more closely to home, to public safety, and obviously, especially the fire department. And Dan and his members, many of whom were here with the Super Sofa Store fire, and who were very closely aligned with the people who died and our heroes, were very, very deeply impacted by this. And so we've had those conversations, and I will tell you, it's heartwarming to see the response, not only from the public safety community, but our community in general. People were very upset about this, and I'd say that's probably an understatement, in a good, positive way. Very engaged, very concerned to make sure we achieved justice and made the arrest, which I'm glad that we were we were able to identify who is responsible.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you for bringing that up, Councilmember Shealy. Appreciate it. Any other questions from anybody on that? And we will let you know as soon as possible when an arrest has been made, and move on from that. But I appreciate the citizens' tips on this, the community coming together. And as the Chief Reynolds and Chief Curry have both said, that it was just a combination of the other civil unrest and the people being concerned. This was part of that, and hopefully that's not the case at all. It's an isolated incident, unassociated with those other events going on. Thank you all for the update on that. And Chief Curry, don't go too far because we're going to talk about your fire station in a second. But we're going to go to Dan Riccio on today is the hour started with face covering ordinance going into effect. And I thought it probably would be helpful to hear from Dan as to how he's going to be tasked with the enforcement of that new ordinance. So, Mr. Riccio, you're on the air.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, basically, the ordinance was went into effect at 12 midnight. My strategy going into this, obviously, is education awareness, warnings. That's going to be my approach, as it was in the beginning of this coronavirus with the big box stores, and educating these businesses and entities of the getting the word out to their patrons and their customers of the importance of wearing these face coverings or masks. So what I've done, we've set up a central line with the citizen service desk to funnel all these calls coming in. And I have an officer dedicated to specifically handling each and every call. So that one officer will be assigned the entire time of answering the calls. A lot of these are questions, and thanks to the legal department, they came up with a fact sheet, which is very explanatory in nature, really, really well put together, answered a lot of questions that we are passing on to citizens and referring them to out in the street if we come in contact with people to go to our website and go to this information if you have any concerns. Now, my officers all have masks with them to distribute if necessary. Obviously, this impacts the tourism industry as well. That was a question asked to me today about, well, how do the tourists know? Well, what we're doing is working with the tourism industry to get the word out, because they have to follow the same, the industry has to follow the same guidelines of wearing masks and being able to give a tour. And they're being provided with the same information that the local citizens in Charleston are. So we're getting the word out. And I can equate, I believe it was very successful in the beginning of all this. I've gone personally to locations throughout the city today to make contact with these businesses. It's a learning curve. You have to revisit. We know that. But we have had many complaints today, but more questions. So obviously, what I always find is most will comply. Most will do the right thing because it's an ordinance. It's not a recommendation. So yes, a $50 penalty is imposed. However, that is the last resort that I want to go to. And it worked the first time going into this. I know it'll work this time. So I feel confident that just reminding the individuals and people that we come in contact and businesses, the word will spread and the point will come across and people will really police themselves.
Okay, very good. Anybody have any questions? Any council members committee members have a question for Dan? Just to reemphasize what your game plan was, to be informative, to educate people, give warnings, but the idea is just for compliance, please comply, please follow through with this. And we're not trying to be punitive. We're just trying to get people to be in line for public safety issues wearing this mask. And I think that's what Dr. Ball told council members when this came up for consideration. They're all kind of masks. Some are better than others, but the idea of a face covering will help tremendously, no matter what kind of face covering you're using for your protection and protection of others around you. So thank you, Dan, for that report, and good luck with that. I know you'll take good care of that.
Yes, sir.
All right, so the last item is our update on the fire station, and our wonderful Jason Kronsberg, who I don't think has had any sleep the last several days. You've been rather busy, and thank you for all of the work that you've been doing for the city. You and your team have just been wonderful, handling a myriad of issues. And sorry to get you back on tune with this, but thought we could use an update on fire station number 11.
Sure. So thank you for having me. Good evening, everybody. So as most of you are aware, the contractor was supposed to be complete by June 7th. They missed that deadline. On June 11th, we issued them a letter explaining to them again what change order number 13 encompassed, which included the liquidated damages provision. So we will be going back to the original completion date of I believe middle to end of December, and we will be calculating liquidated damages per day from that date. So as this current pay period, we'll start withholding liquidated damages, and then once we get to the point in time when the project is complete, we'll take the necessary steps to seek the values of those damages. So that's where we are in the process of the basic legal matters of the project, lay of the land, and on the site. The contractor is about 87% complete. They have indicated as of yesterday, because we do ask them weekly what the new completion date is. Typically, we get a new date every week. So as of yesterday, they have indicated a July 9th final cleaning of the interior, which would hopefully be a substantial completion date. Probably not going to meet the July 9th date. That's just looking at the work still to be completed. Still a lot of site work to be done, landscaping. So we are anticipating more end of July. So as each week goes by, as each new pay application comes in, again, we're withholding the liquidated damages, and we will keep updating as the contractor gives us the updates. So currently, just to give you a summary of the work that's happening, I believe most of the front side or the Highway 17 facade brickwork is complete. Brickwork is being completed and finished out on the rear side of the arch of the apparatus bay. The parapet cap install is moving along on the main facility and ongoing on the apparatus bay roof. Final paint coat on the second floor ongoing. Some finished electrical work is happening. Site work and curbing at the roadway access points are pending an SCDOT lane closure permit. So waiting for the DOT permit on that. Landscape is tentatively to be installed next week. The finished landscape around the fire station. And although there's still some mill work to be done, or not some mill work, some site work to be done to get that landscape completed. Millwork and cabinetry complete, but there's some scribing and tweaking needed, some really just some finished kind of punch kind of stuff that's happening. Apparatus bay paint is going on the interior walls. The epoxy flooring in the apparatus bay will be installed within about 2 weeks. And the concrete flooring on the interior was rejected, and the finished concrete, and hopefully that'll be done in about 2 weeks. So although they say, again, we can only ask the contractor when they're going to be complete. We don't have any tools in our toolbox to force them to be complete other than withholding the liquidated damages. So it's in his best interest to get the project complete. It's so anyway, that's where we are. I know, again, every time we're asked, the contractor tells us a date, and we're getting close. So
Realistically, the end of July is.
That's what we think.
Okay. Chief Currier,
That's 30 days. That's 30 days from now. You're gonna make it in 30 days.
Well, hopefully get it done in 30 days. Sounds like what he just described. You can take care of that within 10 days.
They're saying July 9th for substantial completion. We think substantial completion is more like the end of July, and then punch list and all those sorts of things.
I mean, it's going to take them a couple, 3 weeks just to punch that thing out once it's all done. Easy, right?
Yep. Chief Curry, anything you want to add on to Mr. Collinsworth's report?
Just that he and I spoke earlier today, and I think that Parks and Fires, we're moving forward together with this, and series of unfortunate delays, but I know that Jason is working diligently, as is Beth Brownlee and Edmund, to bring this to completion. So we appreciate that.
Any other questions for Jason? Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Chief, just assuming that it's complete by the end of July, what would you estimate our move time to be to relocate to the new station?
So it's hard to tell until we get in there and look. Just as a loose estimate, we were thinking probably sometime in September, by the time any punch list items got taken care of. So that would be fluid, of course, depending on when the firehouse is complete.
Yes, sir, Mr. Seekings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a long day. A little it seems to me that I know that we're way over budget on this and behind schedule, but given the events at the Sofa Superstore site this week, probably worth throwing a couple of those liquidated damage dollars to some cameras over there so we can have some eyes on what goes on, not just at the station, but around that whole area. Does that seem like a reasonable thing to do at the end of all this?
I was out there on front last week, and you're right on point with that. I made that comment to some of the folks out there. You got a bird's eye view from the corners of those buildings to do surveillance. So it may be worth looking into the cost of doing that and having some good surveillance cameras out there.
I believe that was already being discussed as of Friday morning. I think that fire and police were talking about it. I'm not sure if Parks has been looped in yet, but we'll make sure that happens.
Okay.
I mean, just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We get a great look at the site there. Plus, you have a great look up and down Savannah Highway, so it's a really great vantage point for a number of different things. We might as well take advantage of it for just additional public safety from our public safety team.
Yep. Good idea. Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Kronsberg, Jason, acknowledging that, yeah, we are way behind schedule, but we weren't particularly over budget on this, were we?
No, that's correct. There's some minor change orders, but we're within the budget.
Oh, thank you.
I misspoke there. Sorry, I got that.
No problem. I just want to set that straight. If it was the case, I thought it was the case.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Committee members, Susan has forwarded to me, and I see that y'all all been copied on the link to the recordings. So you should have that. If you don't, please let me know, and I'll try to resend it to you. But please check your emails, and the link for the Channel 3 recordings is now available to you. And you can listen to them to your delight. Okay. Is there anything further that we needed to bring up before this committee at this time? Again, many thanks to my committee members for hanging in there for an hour and a half meeting. This was very important. We covered a lot of ground things do transpire rather rapidly in our city with these events that are occurring. We will continue to review the events of May 30th. Hopefully we'll have a celebration at Fire Station 11 in not too distant future when it's open and running. And the chief will let us know about any other changes with the arrest on the person who may be responsible for the vandalism. And maybe we'll get an update from Dan Riccio on how the face covering mask is taking place. So that being said, and no further business coming before this committee, all of you please have a very safe 4th of July. We all deserve a break, to take some time off with our family and our friends, and I would certainly encourage all of us to do that, and all of us be safe, and God bless all of y'all. Thank y'all so much.
Wear your mask.
Wear your mask. There you go. And take care, everybody. We'll see y'all later.
Y'all have a good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you, Mr.
Good night.
Thank you, Peter.